My name is Avery Calder, and the night my mother went viral for calling me a pig, I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment eating cold lo mein from the box. I opened my phone to check one last notification, and there it was, her post at the top of my feed. Already spreading faster than anything I had ever created. No more feeding a pig. The caption read under a half-empty plate and a glass of wine. My stomach went still before I even saw the comments. Greg had added a collage beneath it, my old room. Half-packed. Beside his new man cave with the caption, "Finally got our house back." Lena tagged her friends saying, "This is your future if you date gamers." While strangers dropped laughing emojis like they were part of the family. I scrolled through every reply, each one slicing a little deeper until I found the one that stopped me cold. Marcus had liked the post without a word. That single heart icon said more than any breakup ever could. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, trying to decide whether humiliation felt heavier in public or in private. Then I set my takeout box aside, took a slow breath, and hit save on every screenshot the post. The comments, the timestamps, even the usernames. My fingers didn't shake, they steadied. If they wanted to make me a joke, I'd keep the receipts. When I finally put my phone face down on the floor, the city outside was buzzing. A low hum that sounded almost like applause. I looked out the window and whispered to no one. "Fine. Let them laugh. They're laughing in my house." That was my first and only note to myself, the one reminder that would matter when the time came to answer back. The truth is, the house they were laughing from was never theirs to begin with. My grandmother, Evelyn, had bought it decades ago, after years of night shifts as a nurse. And when she passed, her will named me as the sole owner. I still remember the lawyer reading it slowly, almost like he knew what would follow. While my mother smiled too quickly and Greg said it didn't matter since family shares everything, I was 22 and grieving. So when they offered to keep handling the bills, I agreed, not realizing I had just handed them the illusion of ownership they would weaponize for years. A few weeks later, my mother slid an envelope across the table and said, "If you want to learn responsibility, you should start contributing." I asked what she meant, and she smiled like a manager doing a performance review. $400 a month, she said, for utilities, groceries, and, adulthood. I remember hesitating, thinking it made sense at the time, until Greg added, "You live under our roof. You follow our rules." The word "our" stayed in my head long after I signed the first transfer. Whenever I tried to talk about the deed, my mother would wave her hand as if I were being dramatic. "Oh, please," she'd say. "Don't embarrass yourself with paperwork talk. You think owning something means you understand bills?" And Greg would laugh, telling me to focus on getting a real job instead of pretending to work online. Each word sank a little deeper, shaping the silence I learned to live with. So I worked quietly, consistently, building a career they couldn't see and a record they couldn't erase. Every $400 transfer sat in my banking history like a receipt for patience. Every insult became a note I didn't delete. They believed my calm meant weakness, but it was just calculation. Because I knew someday the same papers they ignored would speak louder than I ever could. I called my mother that night, while her post was still climbing past 10,000 views. When she answered, her tone was almost cheerful as she said, "Oh, so you did see it? Relax. Avery. It's just a joke." I asked if she thought humiliation counted as humor, but she laughed again, telling me not to be so sensitive. "You need to learn to laugh at yourself," she said. And somewhere behind her I heard Greg's voice cutting in with, "If she can't take a little heat, maybe it's true." I kept my voice even and asked, "Do either of you understand what you've done?" My mother sighed like she was already bored. It's a harmless post, she said. People joke about their kids online all the time. Greg chuckled and added, at least people finally see what we've been dealing with. I stared at my reflection on the laptop screen and said quietly, you'll regret posting that. Not because I'm angry, because it's all traceable. 2. Sandra's voice sharpened. Traceable? What is that supposed to mean? I told her. It means you left a digital trail you can't delete. Every like, every comment, every timestamp it's already saved. She tried to sound amused, but I could hear the edge of worry creeping in. You're being dramatic again. Avery. Nobody cares about that stuff. Greg laughed louder this time. She's bluffing. She wouldn't dare make this public. Douth. I leaned closer to the screen and said, you made it public. I'm just keeping a record. My mother called me ungrateful. Said she'd spent years feeding me. That a little joke shouldn't ruin family ties. I told her. You didn't feed me. Mom, you collected rent from your own daughter and called it parenting. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. Greg broke it by saying, don't threaten us. Girl, you'll regret it. Daughter. I almost smiled. I don't threaten. I said, I document. And before they could answer, I ended the call and opened a new folder on my desktop labeled Evidence, Aurora House. As the screen dimmed, I whispered, let them think the pig finally squealed. They have no idea how loud I can get when I decide to speak. For the next 12 days, I said nothing. The post kept climbing while the laughter turned into something uglier memes. Screenshots. Threads full of strangers debating whether I was the reason adult kids never move out. Greg bragged to his coworkers about finally reclaiming his house. And Lena reposted one of the jokes with a half-hearted, she kind of asked for it. Silence became my weapon. And I used it carefully. Each night, I opened my laptop and added another piece to the folder bank transfers labeled House Contribution. The scanned page from the will. My income reports. The property deed under my name. I kept the files numbered. Organized. Ready? A few friends texted to ask if I was okay. And I replied with the same 3 words every time. I'm working on it. The house they mocked me from was still mine. They just hadn't remembered who signed the papers. On day 9, I caught Greg on video bragging about turning that messy room into his new office. He said, she'll come crawling back once rent hits her. And Sandra laughed in the background. I replayed it twice before saving it with the others. By day 12, the noise had finally started to fade. The internet moving on to someone else's disaster. That morning, my reminder buzzed. The screen lit up with 2 words, post day. I looked at it for a long second before saying out loud, time to tell my side. Then I sat down at my desk, opened the folder named Evidence, and began to write. When I finally posted the thread, I didn't start with rage. I started with proof. The first image was my mother's post. The same caption. The same laughing emojis. Untouched except for the date and time highlighted in red. Underneath, I wrote, this is my mother. Celebrating that her 29-year-old daughter finally moved out after years of freeloading. Then came the next photo. A scan of my grandmother's will. My name clearly visible beside the line that read, sole owner of the Aurora property. I added the screenshots of 8 years' worth of transfers labeled House Contribution, followed by a cropped page of my freelancer income reports. My caption was simple. If you're going to call your kid a pig for leaving, make sure they're not the one who owns your roof. The thread went live at 9:07 p.m. Within minutes, the replies started filling with disbelief, sympathy, anger, and every shade in between. I didn't refresh, but my phone buzzed until it slid off the desk. Sandra texted first. You need to delete this right now. I replied. You made it public first. She sent another message. You're destroying our family. I answered. I'm correcting the record. Greg called 3 times before sending a message that said, If you think strangers care about truth, you're naive. I typed back. They care about receipts. And turned my phone face down. By the next morning, the thread had been shared by a freelance network account that wrote, This is why so many of us move in silence. A Denver community page reposted it with the headline, Daughter exposes toxic parents who mocked her online. The view count jumped by the hour. Each refresh louder than the last. My inbox filled with messages from people who said, Thank you for saying what we couldn't. And others who asked, Are you sure this isn't too far? When Marcus finally texted, his words were short. You didn't have to humiliate them. I stared at the screen before writing back. You didn't have to agree with them. His typing bubble blinked and disappeared. By that night, people began tagging my mother's account. Realizing the pinned post on her profile matched the screenshots in my thread. The same strangers who once laughed were now asking, So, this is the mom. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. For years, they'd owned the narrative with noise. Now the silence belonged to me. It didn't take long for the thread to find its way back to them. At the dental office where my mother worked, a patient recognized her and said, So you're the mom who called her daughter a pig online? She told me later through tears that everyone in the waiting room turned to look at her. Greg's warehouse wasn't kinder. Someone printed the screenshots and taped them near the break room. And the men he owed money to started asking louder about when he'd pay them back. Lena called that afternoon, whispering like the walls could hear her. You need to stop this. Avery, it's blowing up. I said. I didn't post anything that wasn't true. She snapped. You're taking this too far. We're family. But her voice cracked halfway through. I told her, Family is supposed to protect you, not humiliate you. There was a pause before she whispered, I never thought it would go this far. Example, that night. My mother left me a voicemail. You've ruined my life over one joke. She cried, blaming me for the whispers, for Greg's reduced hours, for every stare she couldn't ignore. I deleted the message without listening to the end. Greg texted next, saying I'd made the family look bad and that I should learn to handle things privately. I wrote back, You taught me that privacy only matters when it's your image. 8. By the weekend, the story had spread through local Facebook groups and neighborhood apps. A woman from 2 streets over commented, I always thought that post was cruel. Guess I was right. Someone else wrote, Funny how they loved public attention until it turned on them. I didn't reply to any of it. For once, I didn't need to explain myself. The mirror was already doing the work. I printed the will, highlighted the line with my name, and attached the spreadsheet showing every $400 transfer I'd made since 22. Then I sent one email to all 3 of them. It said, As the legal owner of the Aurora property, I'm offering 2 options. Sign a rental agreement at market rate, or vacate within 30 days so I can sell. An hour later, my phone started lighting up. My mother called first. How could you do this after everything we did for you? I said. You mean after everything I paid for? She cried that she couldn't afford full rent now that Greg's hours were cut. Greg grabbed the phone and barked. You can't evict family. Avery, I told him. Legally. I can. Emotionally. I already have. I haven't. Lena texted next, asking if we could meet in person where they wouldn't perform. We met at a diner off the highway, the kind with sticky menus and too much light. My mother started the moment I sat down. You embarrassed us. You humiliated your family for strangers. Greg leaned back, shaking his head. All this over a joke. You're just proving you don't belong in that house. I opened the folder, slid the will across the table, and said, "It's not your house to belong to." Ice. My mother stared at the page like it was written in another language. Lena's eyes were wet when she said softly, "I knew about the will, but I didn't understand what it meant." Greg muttered, "You'll regret this." Avery. That house is our history. I looked at him and said, "No. Greg. That house is my proof." When none of them spoke, I stood up and added, "You have 30 days. Make it count." Then I walked out, leaving the folder behind. 30 days later, they were gone. The house felt hollow when I unlocked the door, the echo of their voices still hanging somewhere between the walls. Boxes of junk lined the hallway, proof that they had left in a hurry. I stood in the center of the living room and said quietly, "So, this is what peace sounds like." Everyone. Greg came back once more to drop off the last set of keys. He handed them over without meeting my eyes and said, "Hope you're happy. You'll die alone in your condo." I slipped the keys into my pocket and replied, "Maybe, but at least it'll be mine." He gave a small bitter laugh, then walked out without another word. When the door shut, the silence didn't sting, it settled. The next morning, I met my agent at the title office. She pushed the final stack of documents across the table, and I signed where she pointed. The sale closed in under an hour. Watching the deposit hit my account didn't feel like revenge, it felt like release. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, sharper, clean. The sun hit the roof of my car as I whispered, "Grandma, it's done." The house that had been both prison and proof no longer belonged to the people who mocked me. It belonged to memory now. And, for the first time, I didn't owe anyone a thing. I used part of the money to rent a small office downtown. 2 rooms above a nail salon with cheap rent and perfect light. I put my name on the door, Calder Studio, and for the first time, the title didn't feel like a dream. When the first client walked in and said, "So this is where the magic happens," I smiled and thought, finally, it looks real. The same work they once called fake now had walls of its own. Lena came by one afternoon, quiet and nervous, holding a coffee like an offering. She said, "I didn't defend you when I should have." I told her, "You don't have to rewrite the past. Just don't repeat it." She nodded, looking around the office before saying, "You built this from the same silence they mocked." I answered, "That's what inheritance really is, learning what not to carry." I do. After she left, I stood by the window watching the city move below me. The noise of traffic sounded softer than it used to. My grandmother had left me a house, but what she truly left was permission to stop apologizing for the space I take. I no longer needed the house to prove it. The silence was enough. Healing didn't come as forgiveness, it came as quiet. Some mornings I'd catch myself reaching for the phone, half expecting another message from my mother, then remembering that silence was the only truce we both could keep. I stopped replaying the old fights in my head and started filling the space with work, clients, and the sound of my own choices. The weight of needing their approval faded like background noise I no longer noticed. Lena called once more, months later, to tell me they'd moved again. Smaller place this time. She said, "Mom still says you went too far." I told her, "Maybe I did. But that's what respect costs sometimes." There was a pause before she said, "I think you were right." When the call ended, I realized I didn't need an apology, I just needed the distance. I walked to the window and watched the sun slip between the buildings. The same way it had the morning I left Aurora. My reflection in the glass didn't look angry anymore. It looked steady. Respect. I learned. Isn't something you beg for, it's something you take back, one boundary at a time. And for the first time, I didn't owe anyone an explanation.